This is the story of a war that was never declared and a war that never had a name. And yet, it's changed the Middle East more than any other conflict in modern history. Iran stands on one side, Israel and the United States on the other, and caught in the middle, a region teetering between oil, ideology, and open warfare. In today's episode, we're going to explore the real reasons behind why Israel attacked Iran and why America is quietly, well, for now at least, cheering on Israel's efforts to even further destabilize the Middle East. But here's the thing we would be wise to remember. This didn't start because Iran wanted to fight. It started because two powerful allies, Israel and the United States, decided Iran was easier to control when it wasn't free. On February the 1st, 1979, an Air France flight from Paris landed in Tehran. On board was an elderly cleric, soft-spoken, dressed in black, helped down the stairs by French flight attendants. His name was Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, and he'd been in exile for 15 years. But this wasn't a homecoming. This was a revolution. Khomeini wasn't coming back just to visit. He was coming back to overthrow a king, to lead a nation that had suffered under dictatorship, to challenge two of the most powerful countries in the world, the United States and Israel. And let's not whitewash this. For decades, Washington and Tel Aviv had backed one of the most brutal regimes in the region. The Shah of Iran, handpicked by the CIA in a 1953 coup, was a dictator in every sense of the word. His secret police, SAVAK, disappeared, tortured, and killed thousands. Political dissent was brutally silenced, press freedom was non-existent, elections were a joke. But none of that mattered to the West. Why? Because the Shah was their man. He bought their weapons, he sold them oil, kept Iran firmly in the Western camp. Democracy was irrelevant, human rights were disposable, but oil and power, well, they were priceless. And that's the real backdrop to Khomeini's return. This wasn't just the fall of a monarch, it was the beginning of a reckoning with decades of foreign interference, Western hypocrisy, imperial arrogance. So when Khomeini stepped off that plane, he wasn't just welcomed by a crowd, he was welcomed by a country ready to rise and a region about to change forever. So let's rewind a little bit and talk about 1953, a year that changed the Middle East forever and a year that the West still doesn't like to talk about. At the time, Iran had a democratically elected prime minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, not a cleric, not a revolutionary, a moderate nationalist, a lawyer, a parliamentarian. His so-called crime? Well, he wanted to nationalize Iranian oil for the Iranian people. Because up until then, almost all of Iran's oil profits were going straight to British and American companies. Specifically, to the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, what we now call BP, was making millions while Iranians lived in poverty and British engineers played tennis on oil fields that they didn't own. Mossadegh said enough. He passed legislation to take back control of Iran's natural resources. And the response from the West was not diplomacy and not negotiation. Instead, a coup. In 1953, the CIA and MI6 overthrew Iran's democratic government. They named their coup Operation Ajax, under which newspapers were bribed, top generals were paid off, and anti-Mossadegh protests were manufactured. In short, black propaganda of the worst kind, all orchestrated by the West. But don't just take my word for it, all of this has been confirmed by declassified documents. So who do they install in Mossadegh's place? Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran. Not elected, not accountable, a monarch with absolute power, propped up by Washington and by London. From that moment on, Iran was no longer sovereign. It was now a client state. The Shah ruled not with the consent of the people, but with American weapons, with Israeli intelligence training, and a brutal secret police, the SAVAK, infamous for torture, surveillance, extrajudicial killings. This was not democracy, it was dictatorship, packaged and delivered by the so-called free world. And why? Not because the Shah brought liberty, but because he brought stability for oil, because he signed arms deals, because he bought into Western control. Dissent was brutally crushed, protests were silenced, the press was censored, and yet not a word from Washington. Because the eyes of the US and its allies, human rights were negotiable, oil contracts were not. So, let's be honest, the United States did not lose Iran in 1979. It lost Iran in 1953 when it chose corporate profit over democratic principle. This was not just regime change, it was betrayal of the worst kind. And the Iranian people, they never forgot. So the Shah's Iran was rich, powerful, and disconnected. He spent billions on weapons, on American jets, on Israeli security systems, even nuclear research. Meanwhile, while he and his family lived it up, most Iranians lived in poverty. Dissent was punished. The secret police tortured opponents, but the US loved him. Israel even called him a regional partner. But Iranians were angry, not just at the Shah, but at the two foreign powers keeping him in place. And by 1979, people had had enough. This revolution wasn't just Islamic as you might have been led to believe. It was anti-imperial, it was anti-colonial, and very, very, very anti-West. To the protesters, America and Israel were not neutral actors. They were occupiers. They were the ones that had helped install a dictator. They were the ones that had rigged the system and sold the country's resources. And once the revolution succeeded, Khomeini made it clear that Israel was the little Satan, while America was the great Satan. When Israel's embassy in Tehran shut down, it wasn't replaced with another foreign mission. It became the Palestinian embassy. Khomeini's message was clear. Israel was illegitimate. Khomeini's message was clear. Israel was illegitimate, and Palestine's liberation would be a core mission of the new Islamic Republic. This was the beginning of Iran's proxy war strategy. If Israel and the US were going to undermine Iran, Iran would fund those fighting Israel from Lebanon, Gaza, and beyond. Is it aggression or just retaliation? That depends on where you're standing. Then in 1982, 3 years after the Iranian Revolution, Israel invaded Lebanon to wipe out the PLO. Iran supported the creation of Hezbollah, a Shiite militia built to resist Israeli occupation. Their first move was a suicide bombing that killed over Israeli soldiers in Tyre. Then another attack killed 241 US Marines in Beirut. This was Iran's message. You meddled in our country, now we'll bleed you in yours. And while we're at it, let's talk about the breathtaking, unrelenting, unspoken hypocrisy that underpins how the West talks about Iran. Because today we're told over and over again that Iran is the aggressor, that Iran is the problem, that it's Iran that is a threat to peace and to Israel and to the world. We hear it constantly from Washington, from Tel Aviv, from think tanks, from op-eds. The talking points are clear. Iran funds terror. Iran chants death to America. Iran threatens Israel. Iran wants a bomb. Okay, let's take a breath. Let's just interrogate that for a moment. Because what you don't hear, what's almost never acknowledged in these discussions, is why Iran behaves the way it does. What brought us here and who lit the match. So here's what they don't say. Like I've said, the United States overthrew Iran's democracy. Let's start there, for example. The CIA toppled Mossadegh because he dared to nationalize his country's oil, not invade anyone, not launch a war, just asking for Iran's natural resources to benefit Iranians. And for that, Washington sent in the coup plotters, installed a monarch, crushed a republic. And they pretended throughout that time that it was all for stability. And Israel didn't just watch, it partnered. In the 1960s and the 1970s, while the Shah tortured political prisoners with US-supplied tools, Israel was happily selling him weapons, training his secret police, and building joint intelligence projects. So when Western leaders tell us that Iran is a threat to democracy, one might just as easily ask, when was democracy ever the goal? Because for 25 years, the West chose dictatorship over democracy in Iran, not by accident, but by design. Then when Iran rose up in 1979, what did the West do? Did the US apologize for the coup? Did it try diplomacy? No. Sanctions, isolation, threats, decade after decade. The moment Iran tried to step outside the US-Israel orbit, it was cast as an enemy. Not because it posed a threat, no, but because it dared to be independent. When Iran signed the JCPOA, a nuclear deal lauded by experts, approved by international monitors, the US tore it up. Iran complied. Trump shredded it anyway. So remind me again, who broke the deal? And yes, Iran has supported armed groups. Yes, it funds Hezbollah. It backs militias. It plays hardball in the region. That's not unprovoked violence. That's not random aggression. That's Iran doing what any isolated, sanctioned, cornered power does. Push back. Because the West gave Iran no peaceful path, no incentive to play by the rules, only punishment, containment, and the constant whisper of regime change. So when people ask, is Iran dangerous? Here's a better question. Would Iran be different if the West hadn't sabotaged it over and over and over again? This is not a war of good versus evil. It's not democracies versus theocrats. It's not order versus chaos. This is power politics dressed up as morality, where some regimes get weapons, alliances, and security guarantees, others get bombs, blockades, and assassinations. When Saudi Arabia can decapitate American journalists and get billion-dollar arms deal, but Iran gets sanctioned for enriching uranium, let's be brutally honest. This is not a war of equals. It's a legacy. It's a legacy of betrayal, of colonial interference, of a Cold War that never thawed, just shifted battlegrounds. And until we reckon with that history, until we own the role of the US and of Israel in creating this conflict, we will never ever be honest about who the real aggressor is. This is why Iran and Israel are enemies, not because of religion, not because of destiny, but because the US and Israel made Iran their puppet and Iran eventually cut the strings. And now, 4 decades later, the war without a name still shapes every explosion, every headline, and every uneasy peace in the Middle East. So, thanks for watching. And if this helped you to make sense of what's happening, give it a like, leave a comment, subscribe, and let's keep this conversation going. Because this is not just news, it's a warning. With that, good luck.